Nobody at that table ever bothered to ask what I actually did for a living. They had it figured out years ago, or thought they did. I was the older brother, the quiet one, the fellow who showed up in the same dented Ranger he'd been driving since Chrétien was prime minister, who never had a story worth interrupting anyone for. And here's the thing I learned somewhere around 40, that most folks go their whole lives without ever cluing into. When you stop trying to be seen, people stop looking. And once they stop looking, you can build damn near anything right under their noses, and they'll swear up and down there was nothing there at all. I'd let them believe it for the better part of 2 decades. It cost me nothing, and on most days it suited me fine. But my younger brother stood up at our aunt's Thanksgiving table this October and pushed it one notch too far. So if you've got a few minutes, settle in. This is a long one, and I want to tell it right. Welcome to Dad's Fierce Revenge. Do me a favor while you're here. Let me know in the comments what part of the country you're watching from. I read everyone. Now let me take you back to that dining room. It was the second Sunday of October, up in the Ottawa Valley, at my aunt's place in a little town called Almonte. She's got an old stone house off the river road, the kind of house that's been added on to so many times over 150 years that no two floorboards sit at the same height. She keeps it warm enough to grow tomatoes in January. There's always a kettle going. She's had the same flowered wallpaper in that kitchen since before I had gray in my beard, and she'll fight you in the driveway if you so much as suggest she update it. I love that house. I've loved it since I was a boy. I pulled in around 4:30, sat in the truck a minute with the engine ticking before I went up the walk. I always do that. My wife teases me about it, says I idle in driveways the way some men pray. And she's not wrong. The truth is I love my family, every stubborn one of them, but walking into a room full of my people on a holiday takes a certain amount of bracing. You go in knowing who's going to needle you, and who's going to ask the same question they asked last year, as if you never answered it, and you decide ahead of time how much of it you're going to let land. So I sat. I breathed. I reminded myself that a man can drink ginger ale on Thanksgiving and not owe anybody an explanation. Then I grabbed the pie my wife had made, real butter tarts and a sugar pie, none of that grocery store nonsense, and I went in. The house hit me the way it always does. Heat and noise and the smell of turkey that had been in the oven since before dawn. My aunt came at me with both hands, took my face like she was checking to see if I'd melted any since last time. She smells like talcum and gravy and something underneath that's just her, the smell that means I'm home, that I'm small again and safe. You're too thin, you, she said. I weigh exactly what I weighed at our boy's wedding. You're too thin. She said it again like I hadn't spoken at all, and she pressed a buttered roll into my hand before I could put my coat down. That's her. The words are just decoration. The food is where she keeps the love. My wife was already in the kitchen, sleeves up, helping with the turnip, laughing at something my aunt's neighbor had said. She caught my eye across the room and gave me that small, private look she's been giving me for going on 25 years. The one that says, I see you, you made it, it's going to be all right. I went in to find a chair, and that's when I heard him. My brother's got a laugh that walks into a room a good 3 seconds ahead of his body. Big, loud, aimed, whether he means it or not, at making sure every soul present knows he's arrived. He was over by the wood stove, holding quart, a rye and ginger in his hand, his wife beside him in a good blazer, and our cousin nodding along the way he's been nodding along to my brother's jokes since the Mulroney years. Some men find their seat early and never leave it. He's 9 years younger than me. 64 to my, well, he's 55, and somewhere along the line he decided that made him the family expert on how a man's life ought to look. He spotted me, and his whole face opened up into that grin. Desi. He only ever calls me Desi when there's an audience. I've asked him to knock it off more times than I can count. He does it anyway, because doing what he wants and calling it affection is the whole of my brother's gift. He clapped me on the shoulder, one of those grips that's meant to feel warm and lands like a thumbtack. Wasn't sure we'd see you. Figured you might be out at the dump finding parts for that truck. Our cousin laughed. My brother's wife smiled politely into her wine, and looked, I thought, a little tired of him. Still runs, I said, which is more than I can say for some things people my age put their faith in. He didn't catch it. He never does. He just laughed and moved on to the next person, because that's the other thing about him. He never sits in a moment long enough to feel its weight. He skates. I sink. That's always been the difference between us. The afternoon went the way these afternoons go. The turkey came out. Somebody knocked over the cranberry. My aunt told the same 3 stories she tells every year, and we let her. Because the stories are how she counts us, how she makes sure we're all still here. I was having a fine time, honestly. I should have known better than to relax. Around the time the pie came out, my aunt got everybody quiet for the grace, and then she went around the table the way she does, asking each of us to say one thing we were grateful for. Sweet, a little corny, the kind of thing that catches in your throat by the time it gets to the older folks. My wife said she was grateful for her health and for the leaves this year, which had been something. Our daughter, home from Halifax, said she was grateful to be back at this table, and then it got to my brother, and instead of saying his one thing, he stood up, glass in hand. That comfortable, easy confidence of a man who has never once in his life wondered whether the room wanted to hear from him. I'll go a little longer than one, if that's all right. It wasn't a question. Been a heck of a year for us. Closed on the place up at the lake. Business is strong, better than strong. And both the kids are doing great, real great. He smiled around at all of us, generous, like he was handing out gifts. Some of us are finally figuring this whole thing out, eh? And then he turned and looked at me. Direct. Made sure the whole table's eyes followed his over to where I was sitting with my ginger ale. And then some of us, that grin spreading wider, the kind that lets him pretend he's only kidding when he isn't kidding even a little, are 64 years old. Still in that beat-up old pickup. Still renting that little place out past the tracks. Nothing much to show for it after all this time. But hey. He raised his glass toward me like a toast, like a joke, like I was the punchline he'd been carrying around all afternoon. At least he showed up. We keep waiting for old Desi to get it together, don't we? Anyway. Glad you came, brother. The room went quiet, not the nice kind. The kind where everyone hears the thing land at the exact same second, and nobody knows where to put their eyes. My aunt's smile froze on her face, and her gaze cut straight to me, sharp and sorry all at once. My brother's wife stared down into her glass. Our cousin laughed once, alone, and then stopped when nobody came with him. My daughter's jaw went tight in a way I knew meant she was about to say something I'd have to talk her down from later. 64, the old truck, the rented place, nothing to show. He'd said it like a verdict, like a file that had already been closed and stamped years ago. And I sat there, and I looked at my little brother with his lake house, and his strong business, and his kids doing real great, and I felt something move in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was quieter than that. It was something that had been sitting very still and very patient for a long, long time and had just decided, calm as you like, that today was the day it stood up. I set my fork down. I smiled at him. I made it a real one. You worry too much about me, I said. Easy, almost bored. I'm doing just fine. He laughed, pleased with himself, and turned to take a bow at the rest of the table. I let him. I turned to my aunt instead. That sugar pie my wife brought, you have to try it. She finally got your crust right. My aunt blinked, and then her whole face crumpled into relief, and she reached over and squeezed my hand hard enough to hurt. Thank you, love, she said, and her voice was thick. The pie went around. The talk picked back up. My brother kept going, telling some story about a contractor who'd tried to lowball him, and I stopped hearing the words because something had just settled into place inside me, clean and quiet, like a deadbolt finally finding its slot after 20 years of being just slightly off. He had no idea. Not about the company. Not about the floor of offices on Albert Street downtown with my name over the door, 14 kilometers from where he was sitting running his mouth like a man with nothing to lose. Not about the buildings, not about the holdings, not about any of it. And I had spent the better part of 2 decades making good and sure he never would. They say pride's the most expensive thing a man can carry. My brother had been running that tab up for years without ever once asking what it cost. It came due on a Wednesday. If you've made it this far and you're feeling any of what I was feeling at that table, do me one small favor. Hit that subscribe button. A lot of folks watch the whole way through and never do, and it costs you nothing and it helps an old man more than you know. Tap the like while you're at it. Now, let me tell you about that Wednesday. It was 3 days after Thanksgiving, the Wednesday, and Ottawa was doing what Ottawa does in late October, that low pewter sky, a wind of the river that means business, the last of the leaves giving up and going down in the gutters. I was at my desk by 7:15. Coffee from the place on Bank Street I've been going to for a dozen years, where the girl behind the counter has my order poured before the doors even shut behind me. A double-double and a woman who remembers your name. That's what a dozen years of showing up gets you. Small things. I've always been a man who pays attention to the small things. The office is quiet at that hour, which is how I like it. We're up on a high floor, north-facing, and there's a stretch of glass that looks clear across the river to the Gatineau Hills. I've watched more than one hard-nosed fellow walk in, ready to grind me down on a number, and then hit that view and just go quiet mid-sentence. This work is mostly about people. The rest is knowing which part of the people you're talking to actually matters. My phone went at 20 to 10. I looked at the screen. My brother. I put my coffee down. I let it ring twice. Not for drama, I just needed those 2 seconds to decide which version of myself was going to pick up. The brother, the businessman, or the man who'd been quietly keeping my little brother afloat since 2009 without him ever once knowing it. I picked up on the third ring. His voice was wrong. I clocked it right away. My brother has a voice that's always a size too big for a phone, takes up the whole line. This wasn't that. This was small. Hey, you got a minute? He needed a lot more than a minute. I've got a few. I heard him moving around, pacing. He's paced when he's scared since he was a kid in short pants. Okay, I'm just gonna say it straight. A breath. The Brennan job fell through, the whole development. They pulled the financing Friday, no warning. Just gone. Another breath. I've got subs expecting checks. I've got payroll Thursday I can't make. I'm working on it, I am, but he stopped. Started over. It's bad, Des. It's real bad. I already knew about the Brennan job. I knew a good deal more about my brother's company than he'd have ever guessed. I let the quiet stretch out between us like a long road. You still there? I'm here. I wouldn't be calling if I had another way. You know that, right? I need you to know that. I know, I said. No edge on it. How much? He told me the number. I didn't flinch. Not out loud, anyway. Inside, I was back at my aunt's table, watching him turn and find me with his eyes, watching my aunt's face fall. Come downtown tomorrow morning, I said. 9 o'clock. I'll text you where. A pause. Something shifting in his voice, a little confusion, like he was opening a file in his head that hadn't been touched in years. Downtown? Where are you working now? I'll text you the address, 9 sharp. Don't be late. He was late. Of course he was. 9:15, the front desk rang up to say my brother was in the lobby, looking, the receptionist said with admirable diplomacy, a little lost. I told her to send him up. I heard the elevator before I saw him. The doors opened onto the reception floor, glass and stone, and that river view doing its work, and my brother walked out and just stopped dead. I watched it through the wall of my office. Watched him take in the desk, the name carved into the slab behind it, the people moving past with coffee and files, the whole quiet machinery of something that had clearly been running for a very long time. He turned in a slow circle, like a man who'd opened a closet door and found a cathedral on the other side. I buttoned my jacket and went out to meet him. He looked at me, really looked, in a way I don't think he'd done since we were young men. Des, he said. He waved a hand at the room. This is how long of you. Come on back. I walked him through the floor. For him, I think it was like walking through a room he'd been wrong about his whole life. I opened the boardroom door and stood aside to let him in. He took 2 steps and froze, and I damn near walked into the back of him. Because there at the head of the long table, calm as a lake at 6 in the morning, with a cup of tea and a leather folder open beside it, sat my wife. I have witnessed some quiet in my time. I have never witnessed a quiet as complete as the one that came down over my brother right then. He didn't move. The color went out of his face and came back wrong. There she was, the woman he'd once called too plain, too quiet, not the sort a man like himself winds up with. He'd said it to her face. 26 years ago, in the parking lot of a steakhouse off the Queensway, before she was anything to me, when she was just a friend of a friend he'd decided wasn't worth being kind to. She told me that story on our 3rd date, told it lightly, like it didn't still have a hook in it. And I sat there listening and I thought, this is the woman I'm going to marry. I was right about that. I've been right about very little in my life with more certainty. She looked up from her folder and met his eyes and smiled, warm and entirely unbothered, like she'd been expecting him for years, and he'd finally turned up. Hello, she said to him, using his name gentle as anything. It's been a long while. He turned to me, then back to her, then to me again. Des. How is? He couldn't finish a sentence to save his life. Kept starting new ones and running off the end of the road. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat, nodded at the seat beside me. Sit down. He sat slow, like he'd forgotten the mechanics of it. I opened the folder in front of me and slid a single photograph across the table. He looked down. The 2 of us on our wedding day, the old church up in Wakefield, The autumn we got married because she said she wanted to be married with the maples turning, and they were, the whole hillside gone red and gold behind us. Then a second photo. Our two kids, grown now, our daughter who teaches school out in Halifax and looks just like her mother, and our son who's an engineer up in Sudbury and is taller than me and unimpressed by absolutely everything, the way he's been since he was 12. My brother stared at those pictures a long time. I let him. You knew I was married, I said when he finally looked up. You knew about the kids. You came to the wedding for the love of God. You sat in the third pew and you gave a toast about the truck I drove there in. I let that sit. What you never once bothered to find out, in 25 years, was what kind of life it was. Because you'd already decided. You decided when we were young and you never updated the file. That landed somewhere deep. I watched it land. That's the part I want you to understand. I went on, even and quiet. I've never needed to raise my voice to make a point. It was never a secret. There was no big lie. The family knew I had a wife and a home and two good kids. They came to the cottage. The kids grew up running around our aunt's place same as you and I did, sat at that same table, knew their cousins. I never kept anyone away from anything that mattered. I looked at him straight. I just never advertised. I let people who'd already made up their minds about me keep on believing whatever was easiest for them. And you were always the easiest of all. My wife set her cup down with the smallest click and let the silence breathe exactly as long as it needed to. Then she spoke. We didn't go around announcing our lives, she said, to people who weren't paying attention to them in the first place. And Lord, I love this woman. My brother looked at her, and something moved across his face that I hadn't seen on him before. Not embarrassment exactly, deeper than that. The particular look of a man realizing that the story he'd been telling himself about everyone else's life was never once the true story. I said things to you, he started, to her back then, in that parking lot. I had no business. I stopped needing that apology a long time ago, she said, not cold, just done. I've got a beautiful life, a full one. She glanced at me, and her eyes did the thing to my chest they've been doing for a quarter century. Your brother made sure of it. He sat with that. Then he turned back to me, and his voice came out rough at the edges. Why didn't you ever just tell me, one time? Set me straight. Why let me go on like that all these years? I folded my hands on the table and looked at the man across from me, my own blood, and I gave him the honest answer. Because I never felt the need to hand my life over to somebody who'd already decided what it was worth. Telling you wouldn't have been for you. It'd have been for me to win something, and I didn't want to win. I wanted it to be real, and real things don't need an audience. I let it sit a beat. But you stood up in our aunt's dining room 3 days ago in front of everyone I love, and you told them my life was small, that I had nothing, that I was, what was it, still trying to get it together at 64. I leaned back, and I decided you'd earned the chance to find out what nothing actually looks like, and what it doesn't. For the first time in his entire life, my brother, who has never met a silence he didn't rush to fill, had nothing to say. I let him have the quiet. Then I leaned forward, elbows on the table. Let me walk you through a few things, just so there's no more guessing between us. He nodded. He couldn't do much else. 2009. You were 4 months behind on the house. The kids were small. You called me at 11 o'clock at night, and you didn't have to say much because I could hear it. I sent the money the next morning. You told me 60 days. You never said another word about it, and I never asked, because that's not why I sent it. His jaw worked. 2013. You drove out to my place on a Sunday without calling, and we sat at my kitchen table for 5 hours going through your books while the roast went cold, and I rebuilt your whole bid structure because you'd been pricing jobs, like a man who wanted to lose money. You were back on your feet by spring. I kept my voice level flat as a weather report. 2017. The line of credit. The bank didn't approve that, brother. I did. I guaranteed it. Put up my own assets against it. The manager was a client of mine, and I called in a favor I'd been saving for years. I looked at him dead on. And you threw a party. Told the whole family you'd finally gotten the bank to believe in you. I sat back. I'm not telling you any of this to hurt you. I swear that to you. I'm telling you because you looked me in the eye across our aunt's table and called my life small. And I needed you just once to see who you were actually talking to. He didn't say anything. His eyes had gone wet, not crying. My brother wouldn't cry in a boardroom if the building were on fire, but closer than I'd ever seen the man come. My wife stood, smoothed her blazer, and came around to kiss the top of my head. I've got a 10 o'clock, she said. She paused by my brother on her way out and looked at him, not unkindly, just finally, the way you close a book you finished a long time ago. Take care of yourself, she said, and she went. We both watched the door shut behind her. Then he turned back to me and the thing behind his eyes finally broke loose. I've been a fool my whole life, haven't I? He said. It wasn't really a question. Not just at the dinner, the whole way through. With you. You've had your moments, I said. Couldn't help it. 25 years of my wife's dry streak has rubbed off. Something flickered at the corner of his mouth, almost a laugh, almost. Then it went, and he scrubbed a hand down his face. What do I do nowadays? With the company, the payroll. What do I do? I got up and went to the window and looked out over the river, the hills on the far side going dark under the cloud. I let him sit with the question a moment, the way you let a thing be heavy, so the answer means more. Here's what's going to happen, I said. I'm going to phone a fellow I know at a capital firm here in town this afternoon. He owes me a couple. By Friday you'll have a bridge facility in place to cover your subs and your payroll. That part stops being a crisis today. I turned around. And I'm going to send my general manager out to spend 2 days with your people. Your back office is a disaster, has been for years. I've seen the shape of it from the outside. She'll fix it. You'll hate every minute of it, and then you'll thank me. He stared at me. You'd still, after the dinner. You're my brother, I said. Plain. Final. I told you I'd help. I will. That doesn't have a thing to do with what you said at the table. The two have never been connected. That's the part you've never understood about me. He stood up slow and looked around the room one more time. The view, the name on the wall, the quiet weight of a thing that had taken 30 years to build. You had all of this, he said, the whole time, and you just let you talk? I said, sure, I let you talk. But I never once let it change anything about who I was or what I was building. That's the whole difference between us, and it always has been. You needed everyone to see it. I just needed it to be true. He walked to the door, stopped, turned. Looked at me for a long moment, a man recalculating 30 years in real time. For what it's worth, he said and his voice dropped low. I'm proud of you. I should have said that a long, long time ago. I let it land. Let it be what it was. Drive careful, I said. Roads are greasy out there. He nodded and went to the elevator and pressed the button, and the doors opened, and right before they slid shut I saw him, really saw him. Not the loud one. Not the flashy one. Not the favorite our father never bothered to hide preferring. Just my little brother, smaller than I'd ever seen him, and more honest than he'd ever managed to be. I stood in that hallway a while after, just breathing. Then I went up the back stairs, one floor to the small office that doesn't show on the company directory, the one my wife decorated because she said if I picked it out myself the whole thing would come out the color of oatmeal, and she wasn't wrong. I sat down in my chair. My phone already had a text from her. How'd it go? I smiled and typed back. He knows now, all of it. 3 dots. Then did it feel good? I looked out at the river. The cloud had cracked open somewhere over the hills, and a long, pale strip of October light was coming down across the water. The kind that doesn't last but makes you stop and watch while it does. My daughter was flying back to Halifax on Sunday and wanted to do a proper dinner Saturday. All of us. Our aunt too. My son had texted that morning about driving down from Sudbury if I could believe it, which I couldn't. There were butter tarts left over. Somebody needed to deal with the eavesdrews before the snow. A whole ordinary good life, sitting there waiting for me to come home to it. It felt like enough, I typed back, which it has, for a very long time. Saturday dinner, tell your mother I'll get the bird, my treat, and tell our girl to bring that fellow she keeps not mentioning. I set the phone face down on the desk. Out the window the city went on about its afternoon. Traffic on the bridge, the light moving off the water. Everything carrying on the way it does whether you make noise about it or not. Some men spend their whole lives raising their voices just to feel like they take up space. I spent mine the quiet way, building something that was real enough it never needed me to say a word. My brother learned the difference on a gray Wednesday in October, at the head of a long table, sitting across from the wife he once told me wasn't worth being kind to. I'd say it took him long enough. But he's my brother. And I held the door for him on the way out. Same as I always have, same as I always will. If this story meant something to you, take a second and let me know down in the comments where you watched it from, and hit that like and subscribe so the next one finds you. I'll see you then. Take care of each other out there.